I am sharing my method for composting. I have attended a compost seminar and I generated compost at my job, subsequently learning one of many ways that you can compost. This is for yard waste as opposed to composting food scraps or worm composting, which is called vermicomposting. You will need a pitchfork, a pair of loppers, a water source, and a trash can with the bottom removed and with air holes for ventilation. There are actually compost bins that you can use. Compost bins can be pretty pricey, but trash cans can be found for much cheaper and serve a very similar role. You might even have an old one that's falling apart anyway, which is actually a great opportunity to repurpose it. So this video is for someone who is interested in composting using a trash can. Let's go over yard waste. The finer you cut the material, the quicker it breaks down. Branches and sticks take much longer to break down than twigs and leaves. Typically, I don't add sticks and branches if they are wider than about the size of my finger circumference. Greens and browns are referring to the type of material that your compost is classified in. Examples of green materials are freshly cut within a week or so. So this would be leaves, grass, or weeds that aren't seeding or flowering. Reason being, you don't want the seeds of plants that you don't want to be in your compost seed bank. Browns are dead or dry leaves, paper, cardboard that is not waxy or glossy. The waxy cardboard is actually composed of polyethylene, which is a type of plastic which does not biodegrade. Another example would be sawdust and twigs. Greens help with decomposition and heating. They are rich in nutrients for microorganisms that heat the pile and they multiply. This is very rich in nitrogen. Browns help with it not becoming a wet, rotting pile. This promotes airflow and is food for the smaller bugs to help the microorganisms break down the pile, and it's a really good source of carbon in the compost pile. Some say that 50-50 greens and browns are the recommended ratio, and some say 25% greens and 75% browns. There is a lot of different recommendations for how many greens to browns ratio that you'll need because ultimately it depends on what exact material you are working with. My advice is to start with roughly 50-50 on both and then make adjustments along the way. If it's taking too long to break down, you can add greens. If it's getting soupy and smelly, you can add browns. Let's go over the actual process of composting. Put all your cut material into the bin. The more material you have, the hotter the pile will get and it will be a more productive pile. So you want a decent amount of material when starting a pile. If you can fill the trash can about 3/4 of the way, that is ideal. Compost piles take about 6 weeks to mature. Adding new material to an older pile resets the clock on that pile. For example, if a pile is 2 weeks old and you add new material to it, then it will take your pile a total of 8 weeks to mature or thereabouts. This is really only an issue if you are counting on the compost to be ready by a certain time. If you generate a lot of material regularly, you can get more trash cans and have several piles going at the same time. Or if you don't care when the pile is done and don't need the compost for any specific use, then just add it to the older pile. This is more of a passive approach. After about a week has passed, it is time to turn your pile. So you can do this by simply holding the trash can by the handles and lifting it off of your pile. And the material will come out of the bottom and remain in somewhat of a stable pile. Stage the trash can, then pitchfork the material into the trash can. This aerates the compost and helps with the consistency of the pile. The top of the pile becomes the new bottom and vice versa. So once your pile is turned, you can water your compost pile. Water is an essential part of a compost pile. It helps with the decomposition and keeping the pile's temperature regulated. Too much or too little water can hurt your compost, causing it to decompose too quickly or not quickly enough. I typically water a pile for about 30 seconds once per week after turning. Wait about a week until the process is ready to be repeated. After about 6 weeks, your compost will be ready. Adding material midway will prolong this timeline, like I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, the approach that works best for one person can be entirely different for another. This is one approach that is relatively cost-effective and very basic. You can use the compost wherever you would normally use fertilizer. I hope this video was helpful, and definitely comment below if I missed anything or if anything needs elaborating. Have a great day!